Walking a path along the roots of Pikes Peak, you take a fork in the road to the Anselm Society Digital Pub. Inside is a raucous conversation on the arts, faith, and the local customs that we really enjoy about the south of France. At a corner table by the fire are two people. One of them is telling an elaborate story to imply that he's been to the south of France, but everyone can see right through it. And that's me, Matthew Mellema, and welcome to Believe to See, a podcast of the Anselm Society Arts Guild. Here at Believe to See, we explore the relationship between faith, art, and storytelling. Our goal is to help you connect the great story, the great stories, and our own stories in order to better understand what it means to live with a Christian imagination. There we go. All right. And listeners, if anybody has been listening for any length of time, then you know that one of the great friends of the Anselm Society podcast is Terry Moon. And when Terry Moon says, "Hey, Matt, you need to speak with someone," I listen. Our guest today is one of those people. So our guest has recently written a book where when we start describing it to you, you will understand why I could instantly tell that it is very Anselmy. And for those who are not quite familiar what I mean by the term Anselmy, listen to a few episodes, go to our website. You'll understand what I'm talking about. The guest is Sylvie Vanhoozer. The book is The Art of Living in Season, A Year of Reflections for Everyday Saints. And Sylvie Vanhoozer is joining me at the digital pub table now. Sylvie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for asking me.
So let's start with the connection between us, right? How do you know Terry Moon?
Oh, that's interesting. Terry, Terry's daughter, Ruth, and my daughter, Emma, were roommates at Wheaton College. Both coming from homeschool homes. They had never obviously met each other, and they really struck up a long friendship. They decided to stay together the whole 4 years. And they're still in touch and visiting. And so once Terry and I think probably around graduation, they came over and we had them over to the house and connected. And then over the years, we keep finding new ways in which we're connecting. So this has been a sweet time of reconnection recently.
That is great. And one of the ways you are connecting is about this new book that you have. Yep. And I want to get to it. But first, some listeners may be able to infer from your accent that you may not have grown up in Colorado like I did. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in France, was born and raised in a town around Avignon, which is in Provence on the Mediterranean. And I grew up and stayed there for the first 21 years of my life, until I married an American husband and came over.
So Avignon, is that where like the second pope was for a while?
Yeah, that's right. Very correct. That's my birthplace. Yes.
Oh man. So is it still like in the civic consciousness? So like, are the people like, yeah, we had the real pope? Like what is that? How does that go?
Oh, there's so much rich history around that whole place, layers and layers and so the popes is one of those. And yes, they are aware of it. And the palace of the popes is still magnificent. It's all in one piece, see it from miles around. It has festivals in the summer and art exhibits and all sorts of things. So yes, we are very much aware it's right there.
That is amazing. And for listeners who may not have that top of mind, what happened was back in the medieval period, and Sylvie, please correct me if I get this wrong. Mm-hmm. For a while, the papacy was in exile to Avignon for a series of complicated reasons. And he was there for a while. And a lot of people are like, I think it's safe to go back to Rome. Maybe you should do that. So then people got really mad and elected a second pope in Rome. And then there was like, who's the real pope? So then there was a council to be like, okay, neither pope is real. We'll elect a third pope to like settle it. And that did not settle it. All that did was create a third pope. And it was a whole big to-do. Definitely give it at least a Wikipedia. Fascinating story.
Yes.
All right. So that actually is a good hint about where we're going to go with this conversation
Hmm.
because your upbringing, in the south of France, in an area that is very rich in culture and tradition and history, that seems to have really shaped your book. So let's start with the broad question. Uh, what is your book about?
My book is about the art of living in season. It's about how to indwell our seasons and travel through the seasons of the year, I suppose. But it really starts with a charming tradition in Provence, which is the way we set up the crèche. And so it's to some extent has two components. It has the seasons through which we travel, the art of living in season, and then the subtitle, a year of reflections for everyday saints, refers to the crèche from the south of France, which is kind of the vehicle for my pilgrimage through the year.
All right, so let's start with the crash, because
Okay,
I know in a lot of like me and my American brain, when I think of a crash, I'm like, okay, so that's like a fancier title for a nativity scene. But
right.
Sylvie, you've lived in south of France, you've lived in America. Is that wrong for me to just think a nativity scene? Is there more to a crash as you're explaining it in your book?
Yes. So the first the general concept of a crèche is it's a teaching tool. It used to be a teaching tool. You talked about the medieval times, in times where around the 13th century, uh, the people were not the people who came to church, which is basically everybody. The clergy had the scripture that they read. They read in Latin. Most people didn't know Latin and they were kind of illiterate, so they did not have ready access to scripture the way we do nowadays. Nobody really did. They just listened to a bunch of things. And so the creche came around the 13th century as a teaching tool about the nativity. So, I mean, there already were plenty of teaching tools in churches, in the ceilings of the church, the paintings and the stained glass and the portals. There's just loads of history narratives, biblical narrative there. The nativity scene, the crèche or the manger scene, all the same thing, um, brought a visual aid to the people once a year. It brought, Mary and Joseph and the baby and the shepherds and eventually the Magi as well, just all there together. And it stayed within the church precinct as an inspiration for Advent, celebration for Christmas. So that was the idea. The crèche from Provence came a few centuries later in the late the early 1800s, let's say, or after the French Revolution, which was 1789. So, say 10 years later, the crèche was born in Provence. It has a huge difference because, like the way the crèche was in medieval times and the way it is in most of the world, you see a representation of Jesus coming to us, and so that's historically correct. That's what we're supposed to teach about the incarnation. The crèche in Provence, however, has, yes, that whole historical aspect, but it also has an entire population of a 19th century village in little figurines, just like Mary and Joseph, same size, but they all come to the crèche. So, first of all, it's theologically extremely rich because God comes to us, we come to him. There is that response. That's what we do. And the little figurines fit into, I talked about layers of history. So they fit into that as well. First of all, well, they are dressed in 19th century clothes, even nowadays. So they represent the history of the people. There's a reason there. Then they're coming, they're seeking this Messiah that they heard about from the shepherds. They are seeking him. They are entering what they call a pilgrimage through Christmas night, although the pilgrimage sort of is at start having an indistinct sort of length. You don't know quite how long it lasts, but they are seeking him and they want to worship him and they want to bring him gifts. Now, the very significant thing about that in Provence is the gifts they bring are gifts from their land. The land is so important. So they have their costume from their land, they have gifts that come from the land, produce and so on. as well as gifts from their trades, which also comes from the land and their history and so on. And then the little these little figurines are made out of clay, red clay from Provence, the soil of the land, the very soil, and it's the same clay that the red tiles on the roof of the crèche are also made of. So you have the whole country in there that's encompassed in this scene. So it's not just this kind of God coming to us in a distant Bethlehem. No, he's coming in flesh and bones to our land. He's an earth savior, and he's coming to this bunch of earth people. And and then the other important thing is, I'll get to that later, but these little people are called Santons, and Santon comes from the Provençal, so the original language of the people, which some of them still speak. And the original word was Santum, which means little saints. So they are little saints coming to Jesus with their gifts. And so, in other words, what's happening here is the crèche contextualizes the story of Christmas. It puts it in an entirely different area, and they're coming with gifts from their soil, and I like to think it's actually gifts from their very soul. That's how I put it.
Yeah, that is so interesting. So let's start, like, the high level stuff is, most of the way, a quote unquote nativity scene would be used for, us in America is you have like the usual cast of characters. So Mary, Joseph, little baby Jesus, a few wise men, a few shepherds, maybe a donkey and a sheep. And they're all sort of dressed in sort of, robes or something that we imagine being from ancient Judea. But the crèche from okay. I
Provence.
apologize. I want to say Provence. I know
Yes.
I'm saying it wrong. I just don't know exactly how. Provence.
Provence. Or you could say the south of France if it feels better.
I recently recorded a video for another project I have that it was about a period in French history, and I kept every time I pronounced the French word, I pronounced it different. So my apologies in advance for all my mispronunciations. But
That's okay.
but anyway, so you have like the whole city there, and they're dressed in the like contemporary garb made of the clay of the local region, the same clay of the roof. So that is so fascinating. Let's talk some logistics here. So would this be like up near the front of a church? Would this be like in a big civic place? Would each family have one? How would these creches be used?
They actually used it. Well, actually, so the Santon, the little figures, as well as the building, come in different sizes nowadays, and even probably from the beginning. So they do in churches. They set up, and sometimes even in towns. There are towns that are famous. That's the whole town is full of these
Oh, wow.
nativity scenes over the whole Christmas period, and people go there. But so the churches, they have them on. They have trestle tables around the church, and they have these great big scenes. And the santons are about a foot tall.
Wow.
And so it's a fascinating thing. They can make hillsides with cardboard or whatever in the background, and then they'll have smaller santons even to show the perspective, in further villages, so everybody's involved. But then in homes, so they're in obviously museums and stuff, but the family home has the santon, and they're all, for the family home, they are 3 inches tall, basically. They are really charming. They are very, very detailed, and everybody brings them out. I mean, so there's this kind of contrast in a sense in that way, because France is traditionally, I mean, I don't know, officially, according to data, it's kind of a Christian country, but yet it's very, very secular. But the people in Provence, and that's what's fascinating, whether they are churchgoers or not, everybody brings out their crèche at Christmas, and that crèche is really populated with all of that. And because even if they don't necessarily believe Jesus is going to be in there, but they believe in the importance of their land, I guess. So they're bringing, they themselves, the people who set up the crèche, are bringing their all in there. And I mean, it still speaks powerfully. It's amazing to be able to do that. So yes, the homes, every home has a crash basically.
Yeah, and are there like sort of expected characters to have? Like, does every family has like a baker, and every family
Yeah.
has like a candlestick maker? So, like, my family
Mhm.
has an accountant and a plumber. Well, like, how does
Yes.
that work?
Yes. So there are, as I said, some of these santons. So there are some santons that represent the traditional trade, and they come and they present their things. But there are also some santons that have been inspired by folk tales that have been around for centuries, as well as Christmas carols that also impersonate some of these people. These Christmas carols are pretty colorful down there. And they have stanza upon stanza of people wondering, oh, what am I don't know, what am I going to bring to Jesus? What are you bringing to Jesus? And they have these little dialogues. And so some people decide, oh, I like that guy. And some of them have a name. So they are known. And some of them actually are part of our idioms, frankly. It's unbelievable. It's so part of us. And so there is so on the one hand, there is kind of a list of the traditional ones that people like, the ones that appear more frequently in some of these plays and so on. But there's also another charming aspect, which is we'd sort of like to have people that represent maybe a trade that we do or that our ancestors have been into. If you have bakers in your family, and I still do that. When I had one of my daughters in grad school, started raising hens for a community, and so that one year I gave her the hens, and the other daughter picked up a new instrument, a hurdy-gurdy. And so there's a woman playing the hurdy-gurdy in the creche. So at Christmas, we tend to offer these sort of things uh, and as it's not just as a memory, it's also as a way of, especially for the believers, to say this is what you're doing for Jesus. This is what these little scents are bringing. This is what you're bringing to Jesus as well. So it's really rich this way.
I love that. I can tell sometimes when I do interviews, I'm thinking I'm gonna really read a lot about that on the internet after this
Yeah.
recording's over. I can tell I'm going to do a lot of reading about this because it's so fascinating. So now let's go to the structure of your book because again, you talk about how the creche is, it's usually used around Advent, Christmas time, but your book isn't just about Advent, right? It's about the
Hmm.
whole church year. So
Right.
what led, and you've hinted at this answer already, but what led you to use the creche not as just like a Christmas symbol, but as like
Hmm.
the symbol that you're going to base the whole year around?
Right. First of all, this book has been years in the making. It's the
Mm.
result of, it's a passion project that grew in me over the years, partly out of an expression of my love for my land and its traditions, and I was far away. And also just the questions that I always have when, as people like me who don't have necessarily, don't seem to be making as much an impact in your daily life as some others, and you wonder and you want um, to figure out how to live to the best of your ability with the little thing you do to Christ, to His glory. Even, as I said, if I don't seem to be doing anything apparently significant, which is, also, I think it's a question we all have. So, how do I do that? How do I, live that way? So, uh, for some reason, and I don't know that it's everybody, but I've always been preoccupied by the Santon, even though I grew up actually in a non-Christian family. But there you go. There's your witness right there in the middle of the living room, and I thought, well, these are interesting little characters. And I didn't know whether, are they, I mean, are they historical, and is Jesus historical? And I had nobody who was able to give me answers to that. But the point is, then as I became a Christian and having these questions, what do I do with my life? Kind of existential questions. I found that they started speaking to me, and I started talking about it to others. How, wow, I mean, that's interesting. When you wake up in the morning and you think, okay, so today I'm going to wake up and I'm going to make a soup and I'm going to take the kids to school or whatever, and you know maybe there are santons in the crèche that do just that, and maybe that is enough. So that's partly what it was. I wanted to, yes, to just be able to impersonate it. Also, my husband had always encouraged me to write a book about the Santon ever since he found out about them. He said, you should write a book about them. And I'm thinking, well, I'm not a writer, and I didn't know what I wanted to do with that and if I could. But over the years and over the miles, I realized that more and more, I guess, how much they taught me. I found that there was a Santon in the crèche, probably, if not all of them, but in the stories, it's clear. Some of them, they fear getting up in the middle of the night, in a cold Christmas night, and undertake a long pilgrimage that they are kind of scared about, and find a gift to bring to the baby Jesus. And yet they do it. They get up in the middle of the night, in a cold night, they find a gift and they give it to Jesus. And I thought, there are so many days where I and other people, it's kind of hard sometimes to get up to get up, to get out of bed in the morning. Basically, that's what it is. So when I started thinking seriously about a book, I thought, okay, this story is charming at Christmas. And at Advent, it's very spiritual. It inspires us to look for the baby. And Christmas, it's kind of fun and celebration and everything. But I don't want to leave them there. I want to take this Santon out through the year. What are they going to do in January and in February and in March? They need to keep going because I need to keep going, basically. So I started thinking, how about if, of course, we put the crèche away after Christmas. We put it in the basement, in the attic, whatever. But what about if we could continue traveling with them mentally? Or could I do that? And I found that it encouraged me. So then I started finding a different Santon for every season. And nobody else has done this. Is just out of my own imagination, right? Nobody else thinks of bringing them out. But, I think, so there is, for instance, a vintner, and he brings grapes to Jesus. And, I'm thinking, this person has been working in his vineyard all year long for only 3 weeks of harvest. But without the 3 weeks, without working all the time, even when he doesn't see the result at the end of the day, he will not have a gift for the baby Jesus. I mean, that's inspiring to me. You don't always see the result, but so that's why I decided to do the crèche all year long instead of, or at least to carry the Santon with me all year long and imagine what it could be like for this person and that other person. And you find that they all have vocations that are important. How do you work the land? How do you cook your food? How do you raise your children? All these things. And there are Santon for all of those. There are all categories of Santon.
Yeah, and when you phrase it that way, that makes perfect sense why you would, expand it to take and again, I realize I'm going to mispronounce it, Santon from different times of the liturgical year. Tell me about your sources for these. How would I do the plural of a Santon? Santon?
Okay,
Is it
so one thing that I want to say just right off, and I think I'm going to say it every time I talk about that, is Santon happens to combine the two vowels that are kind of difficult to say for those who don't know French too well. So if you want to say Santon, and if you can, if you're comfortable, that's fine. Santon. But also, and I struggled with that when I wrote the book, because I thought a couple of publishers initially said there's too much French. It's going to be too difficult for people. And so I thought, okay, so now I have to clear out the French. But I thought that's why in the book I refer to them sometimes as Santon, but sometimes as little saints, because that's what they are. So if you feel more comfortable with that, that's fine. But
I was just going to say, I do appreciate that. I'm very comfortable making a fool of myself mispronouncing words, so I'll keep going. But yeah, so the Santon, what are the sources of those? Is there like a compendium of them? Or are they all just sort of folk tales that get spread around? Where did you find the different stories of the different ones?
Oh my. So yes. So when I decided that actually, even before I decided that I was going to write a book, as I said, I've always been fascinated with my culture, um, just so much history, and so um, there are books. I have books. That's partly why my husband wanted me to write one of those books, but in English. And I'm thinking, well, there's some books in French already, and I don't want to translate them. Um, so there are books, especially, well, I think as far as I know, it's all in French, really.
Mhm.
Some of them are more for tourists and might be in English. There are, of course, and I have a website actually that shows some of the history and some of the pictures. It's called theartoflivinginseason.com. Very simple. But so yeah, there is not much, and in fact, that's partly one thing that convinced me that maybe I should write a book, and maybe I was the person to write that book because I knew I had done so much research about it. I even sometimes found some mistakes in some of those books because I had,
Mm.
you know, I know a little bit of Provençal. I read some of the plays that sort of inspired the Santon. Listen to songs in Provençal all the time. These carols, and every time I went back to France to visit my parents, I'd pop my head in the bookshop, look up for books. There are bookshops that really specialize on that stuff. Talk to people as well who and how they did it when they were younger, and because sometimes I'm living out here and I'm thinking, am I really imagining? Are people really still doing that over there,
Mhm.
or is it just a dream of my childhood or something? But no, they do. I've talked to them and I've seen it, and there is a magazine that partly inspired the title of the book. I mean, in a sense, that keep subscribing to, and it's The Art of Living in Region. So. And focuses on each issue on a region of of France, and this terroir and all that comes out of it. And sometimes it's Provence, and yes, definitely they still feature the Santon fairs, the just the value that people place in these things, and the traditions they still pursue, even if they're not churchgoers, but there are still traditions around the Santon and the crèche.
Wow.
So I'm
So,
not
so it
sure I
sounds
answered
like
your
it
question.
was. No, absolutely. So it sounds like there's a lot of different stories that have accumulated from a lot of different
Yes.
sources over a lot of years in this region. So,
Yes.
a
So,
very.
I mean, roughly speaking, and I have that going through my book, and I also have it more clearly in the website. But initially there was Christmas carols. No, first of all, there was medieval plays. If you've heard of medieval
Mm.
plays, there's plays that were kind of imaginatively recreating what might have happened around the time of Jesus's birth, and so they include people from the village, and it's oftentimes comical and so on. And then these became these turned into carols, which were called Noel. Noel, our French Christmas carol, is called a Noel, and they are same thing, imaginative. They include all sorts of people, oftentimes shepherds, but not just, who who are on their way to see the baby Jesus, and then they have all these tales and stories that are embroidered around it, and it's really fascinating. And that was in the 1600s. And then eventually some plays were more officially written down, drawing on all these stories and songs and so on. And then the Santon came afterwards. So, yes, many layers that oftentimes I find the people are not as aware of because, it's your bread and bone. You don't think about it. But now that
Mhm.
I am removed from it and started digging around, I found, wow, there are so many fascinating things. So, anyway, I could go on forever.
And I am tempted to ask you just a whole bunch of follow up questions, but unfortunately, we have our time constraints. So let's talk about the more about the way you formatted the book. And again, you structured the book around weekly reflections.
Mm-hmm.
What about putting these reflections weekly? How do you think that that served the message that you've been talking about?
Um, so the weekly reflections, I actually have IVP to thank for that, because when I presented them my book, they were not there. Thankfully, they caught the vision and they loved it and they wanted to run with it. But they were concerned that people would not linger through the seasons the way I had wanted. I hadn't thought of that. I have no problem reading slowly if I want to kind of delay the pleasure or whatever, dwell in a season. They thought this is not going to work. So how about cutting it into weekly reflections to help the people slow down and reflect every week? And I actually liked it. I thought of it. I thought, yeah, I can see that. And I immediately thought of my four points of reflection: pause. The first one, first week, once you finish reading a little chunk, you pause to think about what you've just read. And then the second week, I mean, it's not always in that order, but oftentimes it's ponder. That is, imagine how that might affect you, what you've just read. And then pray is have a conversation with God about that. And then the other one is play your part, is how is that going to affect my life? What am I supposed to do about all that? So that worked really well for me. And I think that's what I would like people to see it as. Read a little bit at a time. There's much to process in there. And then sort of savor it. And because part of the book, the art of living in season, is really the art of walking through the seasons and dwelling in each of them and just learning to slow down. And so that conveys this idea as well.
Yeah, that is a really great way to put it, where you could picture somebody being like, "Oh, these saint stories are all interesting. I'll just read them all at once." But you're saying, "No, let's slow it down. Force yourself to go just a little bit at a time. Spend some time linger here. That'll be a better that'll be more beneficial for you."
Right.
Yeah. So, in related to that, something I found really interesting is that this book has illustrations included, and they're actually botanical illustrations that you yourself did. So,
Mhm.
what do you feel that adds to the overall experience of the book?
Well, again, it's along the same lines as the reflections, really. I see the botanical illustrations as sort of stations where you stop and look at that and ponder a while. But yes, it's interesting that it is botanical. Maybe I should go back to the art of living is taken from the French art de vivre, and art de vivre, art of living, is often associated. If you look at, I mean, I just looked up today definition for art de vivre, and it's oftentimes people think of it as living the good life or benefiting from the good things in life. Well, I don't think that that's the way I want to go. The art de vivre, or the art of living, is, I see it as a fittingness. The fittingness, not for the, not looking for the good life, but the way you fit into a greater story. And in that greater story, of course, God created a world, created the seasons, which is unbelievable. Every time I read that, oh my gosh. And he created trees for food that is good and for delight to the heart. That's all written in Genesis, right? And it is all for us. It is all for us. And unfortunately, we live in a world in which we do not stop. We do not have time to take. I mean, we live in a beautiful world, but oftentimes we don't know it, we don't see it, we don't understand the seasons, whether it is in nature and the gardens, flowers and so on, or in the wild, but also even in our kitchens and in our food. And I have a section in each chapter called The Art of Eating in Season, because that is all a way also of honoring the good world that God gave us. So botanic art is actually the art of paying attention to these things. It's about attending to things. From the first lessons, and that's in the book as well, the teacher will give you a plant and you're supposed to look at it until you really feel that you know it. Or even an apple, just turn it around and then you realize, oh my gosh, I thought it was symmetrical. Actually, it isn't. Just little things like that, paying attention. And so the botanical illustrations are there to show us all that. I felt that I wanted to communicate the beauty of this message of the crèche, not just through words, but in an aesthetic, all around experience. I was hoping that it would communicate an aesthetic vision that would be compelling to people. Just by you live through the book and you think, wow, I want to read this book. I hope people could open the book and see the seasons sort of unfurl before their eyes through the illustrations, that they would be drawn to it through all their senses, in a sense, that they could almost smell the herbs that I draw and almost taste the juicy apricot in season, and even marvel at the miraculous provision of a humble radish, and the beauty of it. So that's what I would like people to sense through that, and I hope they would be irresistibly drawn to that story through, well, the words as well, but the pictures. And then
I
learn to appreciate the seasons by seeing again, oh, I thought we had that all year long, but no, we have it in, I don't know, in May or whatever.
I love the way you put that, where it is a good companion to the weekly reflection, right? It's encouraging you. You only get the full effect if you really slow down and take your time. Like you can
Yeah.
imagine so many of the plants, it's like you walk past them every day, you kind of don't even notice it. But if you're forced to like really pay attention to it, to really look at this thing that comes up from the earth that you're walking on, you can really see all the beauty there. It also connects back to the creche, right? I love that detail you mentioned about how the santon are made from the same clay, like the clay from the earth of the region, same clay that they have for like the building structures. It's all united, and it's all a unified thing. So
Yes.
I have so many further questions for you, but unfortunately we are out of time. So I'll just I'll try to find the answers in your book, maybe.
Yes.
Again, Sylvie Vanhoozer, her book, The Art of Living in Season, A Year of Reflections for Everyday Saints. Sylvie Vanhoozer, thank you so much for joining us. You've mentioned some of this already, but where can we find you and where can we find your book?
Book, InterVarsity Press, and every other places you might think of. And me, as I said, I have a website, theartoflivinginseason.com. And that's about it.
All right, great. Well, once again, Sylvie Vanhoozer, The Art of Living in Season, A Year of Reflections for Everyday Saints. And listeners, as y'all can probably tell, things are winding down at the Anselm Society Digital Pub. The fire is down to embers, the customers are trundling home, and you've polished off your final glass. Once again, Believe to See is a podcast of the Anselm Society Arts Guild. If you have a spare minute or so right now, please rate and review the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much for listening, and we will catch you next time.